Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. It was one of those evenings when the wind slapped faces with an almost conscious cruelty. Gusts rushed through the alleys of Manhattan, snapping signs, twisting shadows, and making loosely closed doors squeal. Passers-by hurried along, bundled up in expensive coats, ignoring the cold with arrogance or resignation. The snow, fine and stubborn, fell silently on the polished sidewalks, covering the city like a layer of oblivion, like a truth no one wants to hear. At the foot of a flickering lamppost, in front of the large bay window of the famous Michelin-starred restaurant, the Grand Oak, a man crouched. Motionless. Like a tired statue that had been abandoned there. His hands, red and cracked from the cold, were buried deep in the pockets of a coat so old it seemed to carry the memory of another era. Elliot Mason. That's what he was called, when his name was still remembered. Some had known him as a master. Others as a genius of taste. Today, he was a ghost with the smell of cellars and faded memories. But behind his untidy beard and dark circles under his eyes, a flame refused to die. Once upon a time, he ruled one of the East Coast's most respected establishments, the 2 Michelin-starred Le Pavillon d'Or, booked months in advance and frequented by diplomats, celebrities, and ruthless critics. He was known for his attention to detail, his bold creativity, and his ability to make a dish speak like a poem. People would say, "Elliot doesn't cook. He tells a story in every bite." Then, one autumn evening, the fire. In a few hours, everything was reduced to ashes, the kitchen he had designed piece by piece, the dining room with its ancient frescoes, the handwritten recipes, the rare bottles. And Emily, his wife, his pillar of strength, died of asphyxiation in their apartment above the restaurant. The investigation concluded it was an accident. But Elliot had never been able to believe that version. A gas leak, they said. But deep down, he felt that someone or something had tried to erase him. And the worst part was, they'd almost succeeded. He had sunk. Slowly. A glass to forget, a bottle to survive. Then the debts, the losses, the streets. No one recognized him anymore. They treated him like a madman when he spoke about his past. So, he finally kept quiet. But that evening, something changed. He looked at the guests seated in the dining room of the Grand Oak, a golden world a few meters away, but light years away. The impeccable white tablecloths, the silver cutlery, the discreet ballet of the waiters in black jackets. And that golden light that seemed to forgive everything to those who had the means to enter it. In this theater of luxury, Elliot noticed an elegant couple sitting by the window. The man was imposing, with graying temples and a confident bearing. His wife was slim and magnificent, but with a coldness in her gaze that reminded him of the blade of a kitchen knife. He didn't know why their faces had struck him. He could have looked away. But his instincts, the ones he thought were lost, reawakened. A silent alert in his body. A barely perceptible smell, coming from the back kitchen. An anomaly. One detail too many. He closed his eyes. And for the first time in years, the leader in him came back to life. Elliot Mason. This is what remained of a once celebrated man. Yes, he had lost everything. But he had one thing left, the gift. The sense. The flair. And that night, he was going to use it. Not for him. Not for honor. But to prevent someone from dying. Not out of pride. By instinct. By justice. Inside the Grand Oak, in one of the private rooms with lacquered wood walls and crystal chandeliers hanging above immaculate tables, a couple dined away from the crowd. They weren't there to be seen. They were there to assert their silent place in the hierarchy of invisible power. Charles Davenport sat in a velvet armchair, his back as straight as a blade. He wore a dark Italian cashmere suit and an antique Swiss watch on his wrist, a symbol of his taste for tradition as much as for control. In his measured gestures, in his silences, one could read the precision of a man who had built an empire without ever raising his voice. CEO of several conglomerates in tech and finance, Charles was one of those men Wall Street doesn't contradict. His calm, steely gray gaze scanned the world with cold lucidity. Facing him was Vivian, his wife of 8 years. Her sleeveless black dress, designed by a great Parisian couturier, hugged her body with icy elegance. Her impeccable hair, her slow and steady gestures, her discreet but hollow smile, everything about her evoked the warmthless beauty of a marble sculpture. Born into an old aristocratic lineage in Vermont, she embodied haughty grace and cutting refinement. She spoke little, but each carefully chosen word was an arrow. They chatted in hushed voices. Charles discussed the upcoming merger between two of his companies, while Vivian nodded slowly, playing with the stem of her wine glass, looking perfectly attentive. Outside, through the window, slightly fogged by the heat inside, Elliot Mason watched this scene with an intensity he didn't yet understand. He didn't know them. He didn't intend to linger here. He just wanted to warm his hands for a moment, shelter from the wind, and then move on to another corner where they might throw some leftover soup. But something kept him rooted to the spot. A feeling. A tension in the air. One of those thrills he hadn't felt in years. He squinted. He looked at the plate the waiter had just placed in front of Charles. A piece of red meat, topped with a creamy sauce, accompanied by mashed vegetables. Nothing spectacular at first glance. But as the dish crossed the room, a scent hit him. A discreet scent. Almost imperceptible. Yet, bitter, metallic, unnaturally sweet. He frowned. He brought his face closer to the glass, trying to follow the dish with his eyes. And there, his instinct took over. It wasn't a classic sauce. It wasn't an excess of caramel. It was something more insidious. A poison. A barely perceptible scent, but one he recognized among 1,000, cyanide, masked by burnt sugar and red wine. He'd smelled it once, during a dramatic incident at another restaurant years before. A hushed-up story, where a famous food critic had been found dead. Elliot had never forgotten that signature scent, that deadly alchemy that only the initiated knew how to conceal. And now he found her here. His heart sped up. His throat tightened. He blinked several times, hoping he was wrong. But no. His nose never lied. It was poison. He looked at Charles, who had just lifted his fork. Slowly, he brought the first bite to his mouth. No. Murmured Elliot. It was now or never. His body reacts before his mind can even find the words. He pushed himself away from the wall, leaped across the street, pushed aside a surprised waiter, and opened the front door of the Grand Oak, shouting. "Don't eat!" Elliot yelled, bursting into the lobby of the Grand Oak, his damp boots slapping on the marble, his tattered coat flying behind him like a burning cape. A waiter, carrying a tray of champagne glasses, jumped and almost knocked everything over. "Sir, you can't be here," shouted a butler, his eyes wide with panic. But Elliot didn't slow down. Driven by a visceral urgency, he pushed past the security guards who tried to block him. One of the guards grabbed his arm, but he shrugged him off. He ran straight for the private room. The murmur of the restaurant had stopped abruptly. The soft music, the clinking of cutlery, the peals of social laughter. Everything had frozen as if suspended in ice. Elliot reached the table, panting, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes shining with fever and determination. "Mr. Davenport," he called hoarsely. "Don't touch that plate." He pointed at the dish, then looked straight into Charles's eyes. "Your wife put poison in it. Cyanide. Hidden in the sauce. Don't eat." A deathly silence fell over the room. Vivian, petrified for a moment, her fork suspended between two manicured fingers, suddenly came to her senses. She burst into a nervous, mocking laugh, as sharp as broken glass. "My God, what a pitiful comedy! Who let this human waste in? This isn't a restaurant for the mentally ill." "Madam, sit down," a waitress intervened, feeling uneasy. But Charles wasn't laughing. He hadn't moved. The fork hung halfway above his plate. His eyes, initially surprised, had become attentive. Focused. He was observing Elliot with a rare intensity. The man facing him had neither the mannerisms nor the appearance of a madman. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't delirious. He spoke calmly. Precisely. Like a professional. Elliot continued, lower this time, his voice trembling with emotion. Sir, I recognize the smell. It's a sauce that's too sweet, too thick. It's masking something. I was a chef for 20 years. I know that signature. Someone tried to cover up a murder. Security had moved closer, ready to tackle him to the ground. But Charles slowly raised his hand. Wait. He looked at Vivian, who was trying to hide her confusion behind a tight smile. Then he looked at his plate. Then Elliot. Call the police, he finally said in a deep voice. And seal this plate. Right away. A breath rippled through the room. Vivian suddenly paled. She changed color like a poisonous flower caught in the act. Her gaze swept the room quickly. She tried to laugh again, but no sound came out. Charles, come on. Are you going to listen to a bum who comes roaring in here? Are you serious? But Charles didn't answer. He now looked at his wife like a stranger. A crack had just opened in their golden world. Elliot, still standing, arms raised, stared at the plate, as if protecting someone from an invisible death blow. The agents arrived less than 10 minutes later, escorted by 2 plainclothes detectives and a forensic technician carrying a black briefcase. The Grand Oak, normally a temple of gastronomy and social discretion, had become a frozen theater, where glances crossed between fear and unhealthy curiosity. Mr. Davenport, we've been informed of an attempted poisoning, asked Inspector Briggs, a broad man with bushy eyebrows, as his partner took notes. Charles, still calm, pointed to the plate. She's the one you need to examine. My meal was served with this sauce. And this man claims it contains cyanide. The technician opened her briefcase and took out a sampling kit. In cathedral silence, she scooped up a little of the sauce with a cotton swab, then poured a few drops into a reagent tube. A second passed. Then another. And suddenly the liquid turned dark blue. She looked up, her voice blank. Presence of cyanide confirmed. Lethal dose. A shudder ran through the room. Several customers let out muffled gasps. One of them stood up quickly to leave, his hand over his mouth. Vivian jumped up, her eyes wide, playing surprise and anger. This is absurd, she screamed. You have no proof that this came from me. Who says that vagabond didn't tamper with the plate himself? Madam, stay calm, intervened the inspector. Your handbag, please. What? Is this a joke? You really think that? But the plainclothes officer had already grabbed the Hermes pouch lying next to her. He methodically opened it and removed a small, carefully stoppered glass vial containing an amber liquid. The forensic technician examined it, carefully opened the bottle, took a drop, and performed a quick test. Same reaction. Dark blue. It's the same substance, she confirmed. Cyanide. Pure. Vivian blanched. Her mask suddenly cracked. Charles, still standing, looked at her now like a riddle he should have solved sooner. His face expressed neither anger nor shock. Only profound fatigue. An icy emptiness. Inspector Briggs approached Vivian, presenting her with his handcuffs. Vivian Davenport, you are under arrest for attempted first-degree murder. You have the right to remain silent. This is a mistake, she screamed, struggling. Charles, say something. You're not going to let me be humiliated like this. That tramp turned you against me. You're nothing without me. You know that. But Charles didn't answer. He simply looked away. As the officers led Vivian away under the flashing lights of their cell phones, the undercover detective returned to Charles with preliminary results. He had consulted the establishment's main server as well as internal cameras. "Mr. Davenport, let me be blunt, we've found more than just the poison. The videos show that it was your wife who surreptitiously switched the plate with the one originally prepared by the kitchen. And according to our initial checks, she recently asked a notary to amend your will, without informing you." "My will?" Charles repeated, frowning. "Yes. She would have amended the clauses to be the sole beneficiary in the event of accidental death. And that's not all, she booked 2 tickets to Nassau, Bahamas, in the names of Vivian Moore and David Linton. Her lover, apparently. Departure scheduled in 3 days." A cold shiver ran down Charles's spine. Everything he thought he knew, everything he'd built with her, was nothing more than a screen of polite lies. And everything would have worked. Everything would have been perfect. If there hadn't been a forgotten man, a former leader who had fallen in the street, who still had the gift of recognizing the smell of death. Vivian was led away in handcuffs, her heels clicking on the floor, her screams reduced to whispers. Arrogance had turned to panicked rage. Elliot, however, hadn't moved. He still stood a few feet away from the table. Silent. Trembling. His eyes were full of fatigue, but also, of a certain old fire. The one he thought had been extinguished long ago. Charles slowly approached him. "You saved my life," he whispered. And he added, in a low, almost moved voice. "I want to know who you are. And I want to know why a man like you is living on the streets." In the days that followed, Charles Davenport found no rest. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of Elliot Mason came to him, that tired but dignified face, those eyes burning with alertness, that firm voice, emerging from the cold and contempt, and above all, that gesture, intervening without hesitation, in front of dozens of guests, to save a man he didn't know. Unarmed. Unproven. Unprotected. Just with his truth. Charles, accustomed to numbers, fusion tables, and calculated decisions, found himself for the first time faced with something he could neither buy nor quantify: gratitude. Moral debt. He went to the police station to retrieve the reports. He reread the testimonies 3 times. Then he discreetly asked a private detective to trace the path of this mysterious tramp with a nose sharper than a laboratory. A few days later, the file arrived on his desk, delivered by his assistant, who looked troubled. When he opened it, Charles froze. Elliot Mason. This name, now etched in his memory, was not that of a vagabond. It was a name that American haute cuisine had once praised to the skies. Executive chef at the Pavillon d'Or. Double Michelin star. Former trainer of several now famous chefs. Creator of signature recipes still taught in some culinary schools in Chicago and Boston. Considered in the 90s as one of the 10 greatest culinary minds in America, according to the New York Times. And then, the sudden collapse, suspicious fire, loss of his wife Emily Mason, bankruptcy, spiral of depression, disappearance from the radar. Charles slowly placed the file back on the table. He stood motionless for a long time, watching the rain fall on the bay window of his office. He then understood that the man who had saved his life was not a madman. He was a broken genius. A man swallowed by the silence of the world. And he owed it to her. He tracked Elliot down to a homeless shelter in Brooklyn. A gray, charmless building where the staff did their best with too little. Charles entered unescorted, without a tie. He found Elliot sitting on a bench in the common room, holding a lukewarm coffee, staring into space. His clothes had been washed, his beard barely trimmed, but his gaze still carried the weight of forgetfulness. Charles approached. "Mr. Mason." Elliot slowly looked up. He recognized him. And frowned. "What are you doing here? Have you come to accuse me of something?" "No," said Charles, sitting down next to him. He stared at him. Honestly. Straightforwardly. "You saved my life. For no reason. Without knowing me. Now it's up to me to help you find yours." A silence. Elliot looked down, shook his head. It's too late for me. That world. I believed in it. Before. But not anymore. It spat me out like garbage. And it'll spit you out too, one day or another. Charles wasn't put off. He stood there, silent for several seconds. Then he handed over an envelope. Inside, an apartment key, a medical insurance card, and a financing plan for a culinary project. On the folder, a handwritten title. Renaissance, Cuisine, Memory and Dignity. It's not charity, Charles said softly. It's only fair. You've kept your gift, even in the mud. The world may not deserve your talent, but some people do. And I don't think you've had your last word yet. Elliot refused. 3 times. He threw away the key, pushed the papers away. He wanted nothing. He had been betrayed too much. He had hoped for too much. He had failed too much. But Charles came back. Again. And again. He didn't offer glory. He didn't promise oblivion. He offered a place, respect, a kitchen of his own. And it was the kitchen that, little by little, made the walls wobble. One morning, Elliot agreed to accompany Charles to an old Soho office he was planning to renovate. There, in an empty room with dusty floors, Charles unrolled an architectural plan. Here, the piano. Here, your personal space. Here, a table d'hôtes. And here, a glass wall so everyone can see you cooking. Nothing to hide. Just you. Elliot silently placed his fingers on the map. His gaze wandered for a moment. Something stirred in his chest. An image of Emily, behind the counter at the Golden Pavilion. A memory. A voice. A fire. He inhaled. Do you want a kitchen? He looked up. Then make it white. No chrome. No flash. Just light and silence. I don't want to cook for the powerful anymore. I want to cook for those who have never been seen. Charles nodded. Then we'll do it your way. And for the first time in years. Elliot Mason says yes. 6 months later, in the vibrant Soho district, between art galleries and designer studios, a new name appeared in sober letters on the red brick facade of a renovated former warehouse. Masons. No gilding. No neon lights. Just a sign carved into wood, and soft light filtering through a large bay window. Inside, there were no silk tablecloths or stiff waiters. The decor, minimalist and warm, combined raw wood, frosted glass, and touches of black metal. Every detail exuded authenticity. But what made Mason's unique wasn't just its aesthetics. It was his soul. Upon entering, a discreet plaque was fixed to the wall. Every dish here has a story to tell. The story of those we thought were lost. But who have returned. Because Elliot Mason hadn't just reopened a restaurant. He had built a sanctuary. The menu wasn't just refined. It was narrative. It was alive. Each dish carried a name, a memory, a lesson. The Silence of Emily, a clear broth with forgotten vegetables, in tribute to his late wife. The Eve of Fire, smoked meat with maple bark, served on a heated stone, to recall the night everything burned. Reconstruction, an evolving plate, whose composition changed every week, prepared by an apprentice of the program. Because that was where the real heart of the project lay. Elliot had gathered young people rejected by the system into his brigade, former inmates, adult orphans, young people without qualifications or direction. He trained them rigorously, but also with rare kindness. He didn't just teach them how to cook. He taught them what the world had denied them: patience, pride, the ability to share knowledge, dignity. Mason's wasn't a restaurant. It was a second chance served on a plate. On the evening of the inauguration, the room was full. Journalists from all the major culinary magazines were there. Influencers, star chefs, former colleagues who hadn't seen Elliot in years, and at the back of the room, a few lesser-known but oh-so-important faces, volunteers, social workers, apprentice families. In respectful silence, Charles Davenport stepped onto the improvised stage, dressed in a simple dark suit, no tie, his gaze grave but luminous. He took a deep breath. This man, he said, pointing at Elliot, was ignored, rejected, forgotten. He knew glory, then the abyss. He lived through what few men survived to experience. But one night, he stood up to save me. Me, a stranger. He paused. His gaze clouded for a moment. He didn't just save my life. He reminded me that true genius doesn't always shine in the spotlight. Sometimes it hides in the cold, the dust, the ruins. Today, I'm here to honor him. But above all, to learn from him. A thunderous applause erupted. Then Elliot stepped forward. His white chef's jacket was immaculate, his hair swept back, his face lined but dignified. He held a piece of paper in his hands, but didn't read it. He looked around the room. Slowly. And said simply, his voice deep but clear. What I lost was confidence. He paused. What you gave me back was faith. He looked down for a moment, then raised his head, firmer. Faith in myself. In what cooking can still bring. Faith that a dish can reconcile a man with his memory. And that sometimes, saving a life begins with refusing to remain silent. Vivian Davenport was tried after a trial that captivated the media for several weeks. The evidence was overwhelming: fraudulent alteration of a will, international bookings under false identities, illegal acquisition of poison. And above all, the vial found in her bag, etched in the public's memory as a symbol of her icy betrayal. Her lawyers argued that it was a moment of madness, a stifling marriage, a destructive passion. But nothing could erase the methodical premeditation. Nothing could make her forget her indifference when her husband almost died. The verdict was final. 25 years in prison for attempted premeditated murder. She was incarcerated in a federal facility, far from the red carpets and high society dinners. And in that prison silence, Vivian Davenport understood what true oblivion was. As for Charles Davenport, he continued to be a feared businessman in economic circles, but never the same again. His outlook on the world had changed. He, who had dedicated his life to growth and profitability, discovered the power of human redemption. He established a foundation in Elliot Mason's name, dedicated to supporting the homeless, former prisoners, and those experiencing social breakdown. He funded the renovation of several shelters in New York City, where he installed cooking, carpentry, and sewing workshops, spaces where rebirth became possible. When a journalist once asked him what had motivated this commitment, Charles replied simply, "Because I was saved by a man I once would have ignored. And because no gift should die in silence." And Elliot Mason became more than a leader. He became a symbol. We saw him invited onto television shows, honored at culinary schools, and cited in TED Talks on resilience. But each time, he rejected the language of fame. He said, "I'm not a miracle. I'm a reminder. A reminder that we can fall 1,000 times, but all it takes is an outstretched hand, a second of faith, for the light to return." At Mason's, renowned chefs sometimes came to dine discreetly, to understand what made the difference. It wasn't the techniques or the rare ingredients. It was memory in the gestures, tenderness in the silences, and the intensity of a man who had lost everything, except the desire to feed. Young people released from prison were then recruited to other Michelin-starred establishments. Former foster children opened their own food trucks. And each of them always told the same story, that of their mentor, Elliot, the last chance chef. The New York Times once devoted a double page to him, with this headline etched in people's minds: "He was broken. He became a legend." In schools, his trajectory was taught. In homes, his story was told like a modern fable. And in the hearts of the forgotten, Elliot Mason had become living proof that man is never reduced to his fall. He proved to the world that dignity cannot be bought. May talent never die. And that a broken man can become a legend again, when you reach out to him at the right time.